Jesus is the reason for the season. If that is the case, we need to be talking a lot about Jesus. If he is the reason for the season, then our conversation needs to be drenched in conversations about Jesus. I've really been trying to explain to you how important Jesus Christ is when it comes to your salvation. That you need to understand that you would not be saved without Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is above all things, and Jesus Christ is ahead of the church. And then I wanted to talk last week from that Thessalonian text that talks about while you're waiting on Jesus, you need to be working for Jesus. You don't need to stop doing what you're doing for the Lord because you're waiting on Jesus, because all of us are waiting on Jesus. Either you're going to meet Jesus at the rapture, or either death is going to come knock on your door and you're going to have to answer. But either way, you're going to meet Jesus. Matter of fact, that text in Corinthians says we shall all stand at the judgment seat of Christ to give an account of the deeds done in this body, and that is the bema seat, judgment seat of Christ. All of us are going to meet Jesus one way or the other. Either death is going to track us down, or we're going to run into the second coming of Jesus, where Thessalonians says, we shall not all sleep, but those who are asleep in Christ shall be caught up to meet him in the air. The dead in Christ shall rise first, and then we that remain shall meet the Lord in the air. And he says, confident, have hope in this expectation. I'm just trying to explain to you that Jesus Christ is important when it comes to our salvation. Not just prosperity, not just healings, but to be in a saving relationship with Jesus Christ. And now I want to focus now on the rest of the year. I wanted to establish how important Jesus Christ is when it comes to your salvation in saving you. You wouldn't be saved if it was not for Jesus Christ. One of the things Jesus talks about a lot in the gospel is no man comes to the Father except the Father draw them. You're saved because of Jesus Christ. He saved you. He chose to save you, predestined you to be a part of the body of Christ. In other words, you didn't have a desire to be saved, but he saved you because he wanted to predestine you and use you. That's why you're sitting in this church this morning. Now I'm going to focus on Jesus Christ actually involved in the lives of people in which he saved, people in which he encountered. Now, I know I preached this text a lot of times, but you know what I want to talk about this morning that is so interesting, that is going to be a real game changer in the text. I don't want to talk as much about the woman. I want to talk about the other people in the text. Because the other people in the text are just as interesting, and they have some involvement of why the woman is at the well in the first place. And you cannot ignore the other people that are in the text, even though Jesus doesn't spend a whole lot of time talking about them. But there are some other people in this story. There are some other people in this conversation that are critical, that we need to extract from this conversation, from this narrative, from this story, because in this narrative, these people affect this woman's decision, this woman's outcome. And the reason why this woman is at the well is because of the other people that are in the text. She's not there by happenstance. She's not there by incident. She's not there by accident. But a lot of people contributed to this woman being at the well at this moment in Sychar, or in Samaria, where Jesus was going to encounter this woman. And I need to explain and express to you, my brothers and sisters, you need to sometimes ask the question why people got to where they are. Why people are who they are. And sometimes it is because of the decisions and the actions of a whole lot of other people. And in this text, it is the same circumstance. This woman was there because of the other people in the text. And I want to talk about the other people because she is going to find herself in a situation she, in a sense, did not ask for it. And I don't want to obfuscate, I don't want to excuse personal responsibility because she is somewhat personally responsible for where she is in life. But she's also the victim of other people's choices, decisions, and actions that determines that she is where she is. So I want to look deep in this text because there are other people in the text that we need to talk about. If we always talk about only this woman, you're going to miss the big picture. Jesus did not focus on these people, but these people are in the text nevertheless. Have you ever asked the question why somebody is where they are? How did they get there? What circumstances drove them there? And whenever I do pastoral counseling in certain circumstances, sometimes you look at the victims and other times, Judge, you look at the perpetrators. Because sometimes the victim is where they are, but sometimes you have to consider the perpetrators that made them a victim. In other words, you got to look at the people who forced them to be where they are, doing what it is that they done, that made them who they are, that got them where they are. That's what I want to consider in the text. And it's a whole lot of people in this text that led this woman to be where she was. That made Jesus target her to make her realize that, listen, you might be where you are, but listen, I'll come where you are to give you what you need because I love you. I'm going to use you. Everybody else might have written you off, but I'm not done with you yet. Isn't that a good news? That even though the people in this text had written this woman off, Jesus says, I'm not finished with you yet. I'm not done with you yet. The work is not complete in your life. I don't care what people think. I don't care what society thinks. I don't care what the church thinks. Jesus is really saying to this woman, the work that I'm going to do in your life is not yet over and not yet done. Now let me give you some context because the context that is in this text is very interesting. And really, John does a masterful job in putting these three stories in the first three chapters of John together. If you read chapter 2, it is about Jesus turning water into wine. Isn't that interesting that he puts these three stories together? He first turns water into wine. You go to chapter 3, you see Jesus talking to Nicodemus. And by chapter 4, you see Jesus talking to the Samaritan woman. Now, it might not look very interesting until you consider why John wrote the Gospel of John. He wrote the Gospel of John to declare that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. He wanted to talk not only about his divinity, but his humanity. That Jesus was both God and both man, and he operated on earth as both. Now, he really wanted to speak to the humanity of Jesus, and he really wanted to explain that even though Jesus was God, he still had a human touch, and he still developed empathy for people, especially when they were in tough situations. Now, because if you look at the wedding feast, Jesus really didn't have to get involved, but Jesus' mother said, you need to get involved, and Jesus says, I'll get involved because I don't want this family to be embarrassed. And many scholars believe that Jesus performed this miracle because Jesus was at this miracle because this was some of his kinfolks, his distant cousins, and to run out of wine was embarrassing. And so Jesus got involved and he solved the problem for people who would be embarrassed in every other case. But Jesus decided to spare them the embarrassment by turning water into wine. And usually you save the best wine.
That's right. That's right.
But Jesus got involved and changed the situation. And then in chapter 3, he does something very interesting. And it really speaks, Sinitra, to the range of Jesus. Because in chapter 3, he deals with the most educated, sophisticated, highfalutin, bougie person, which is Nicodemus. But by chapter 4, he goes down to the bottom of the barrel. He deals with a woman in Samaria who has a bad reputation, who nobody likes. The church has castigated. Men have used her, and the women despise her, and the disciples didn't want nothing to do with her. So look at the range of Jesus. He deals with both the educated and the ones who are at the bottom of the barrel. Jesus has a spectrum of both saving the educated and the discarded. Do I have any witnesses in here? So I don't care what group you are a part of, Jesus wants to reach you. If you're Nicodemus, educated and a part of the religious establishment, Jesus will come to where you are. And if you are like the Samaritan woman, nobody wants nothing to do with you, baby, I'm trying to tell you, Jesus will come and deal with you. It's right there in the text. And John deliberately put these two stories together to speak to the reign of Jesus' reach. He wants both the educated Nicodemus. And the two difference between, one scholar wanted me to share with you, the difference between the person in chapter 3 and the person in chapter 4. The person in chapter 3, they were seeking Jesus. The difference in the person in chapter 4, Jesus went and sought that person. Because you remember, Nicodemus came to Jesus by night. He was seeking Jesus because he had heard about Jesus. He had listened to Jesus. He saw Jesus. And the text says that he came to Jesus by night to ask Jesus some questions. But now the person in chapter 4, they wasn't seeking Jesus. Jesus went and sought her. Jesus went looking for her. And my brothers and sisters, I need to tell somebody in here, you might not be looking for Jesus, but Jesus is looking for you. Jesus will come to where you are. Jesus will come to your circumstance. Jesus will come to your location. I don't care how undesirable your location is. I'm coming here to tell you, Jesus will come to where you are. You might not be seeking him, but he is seeking you. And it really, John in this gospel, explains and expresses to us the person of Jesus, the evangelism of Jesus, the reach of Jesus, the interest of Jesus to get both the educated and the uneducated, the very religious, the very non-religious, the marginalized, and then the upper scale, upper epsilon, bougie, affluent, rich, and prestigious person, as well as the person that has the worst of reputation. And I need to give you a word of encouragement. I don't care what people say about you, Jesus still wants you. No matter who you are, what people think about you, what people have said about you, Jesus still desires to have a relationship with you. And that's pretty good news. And I want to really kind of pull this out and talk about these other people that are in this text that got this woman to where she is. Because you know, this woman was at the well at an odd time of the day. Y'all know the story as much as I know it. You know, she wasn't really supposed to be at the well at all. But the women who gathered the water, they wouldn't come in the heat of the day. They would come in the cool of the day. They would come around 6 o'clock when the sun was down. It wasn't so hot, so you wouldn't put much effort into trying to draw water. And the well was a meeting place for women to talk, for women to gossip, for women to share recipes, for women to talk about their children, their husbands, and their lives. And so around 6 o'clock, all the women would gather around the well to not only gather water, but to also have a conversation. That's the first group I want to talk about. That's in the text, that is obvious in the text, and historically it's in the text, and literally it's in the text, and it is an assumed assumption that she should have been at the well where the other women would come to the well as well, because it was not only a place to get water, but it was a gathering place. It was not only a gathering place, it was a place of fellowship. It was a place of conversation. It was a place of camaraderie. It was a place where the women gathered to discuss and to fellowship and to mingle among each other. but she was not welcome among the other women. And so she had to come at an odd time of the day, which was at 12 noon, at the hottest hour of the day. And the text will indicate that nobody would come to the well to draw water because she was there. Would nobody come because they knew who she was, they knew what she had done, and nobody would show up, nobody would gather, and so she had to go all by herself. I couldn't imagine the pain, the loneliness, the isolation, the despair that this woman felt because she had been through so much. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, but I'm telling you, what she needed was fellowship of other women, comfort of other women, the hope of other women to inspire, whisper into her ear, it's going to be all right no matter what you have been through. But this woman had to come at 12 o'clock, not when the other women gathered. She had to come to the well alone. And no matter how she left home, and she really needed the fellowship of other women, and they wouldn't even come and gather with her, and they wouldn't let her among them when they came in the cool of the evening. They wouldn't even let her draw water with them. They had literally excommunicated her. They would not even fellowship with her. They would not even talk with her. They would not even have any dealings with her. And so she had to go all alone. And the text indicates that this was very troubling for her, because my brothers and sisters, I want to explain this to you. It ain't nothing worse than to be excommunicated out of any situation. It's nothing worse than to be blackballed. It's nothing worse to need fellowship and camaraderie and nobody will talk to you, nobody will fellowship with you, and you seem all alone.
All right.
The women wouldn't even let her come and hang among them just to draw water. I want to talk about that group, the women. But let me tell you why the women hated her that's in the text. The women hated her because the men loved her.
Yeah, that's right.
You don't want to skirt over that, because the woman had 6 men, according to Jesus, the conversation. And the men loved this woman. This woman had went from man to man, and she didn't have a problem getting men.
That's right.
And I really want to explain this to you. She was used by the men. And one commentator said she probably had somebody's husband. She probably had somebody's boyfriend. And this woman was not trusted among the women. She was used by the men, and she didn't have a problem getting men. And so therefore, this indicates, according to the conversation Jesus had with her, that she was very popular among the men, but they didn't love her for the right reasons, but they loved her because they wanted to use her to get from her what they wanted.
That's right. That's right.
And because she was so loved among the men, she was so despised among the women. I'm telling you, this woman, this group of men that used her over and over and over again. I really was interested in why some commentators thought Jesus added this element into the story, and most of them concluded that all this woman was really looking for was love.
Yeah.
All she really wanted was to be loved. All she wanted was to be loved by a man. And she went through man after man after man after man and still could not find love. She couldn't find it until Jesus found her. The men are the unspoken characters in the text because they used her over and over again. And boy, if I had time, TJ, I'd explain about how if you let men use you, you'll be empty when they get through using you. Because a man can never fill the tank that needs to be filled, that can only be filled by having a genuine relationship with Jesus Christ. Because the Bible says, as the deer panteth after the Lord, so my soul panteth after the Lord. And listen, I'm telling you, as the deer panteth after the water, so my soul panteth after the Lord. There is a space in you that only God can fill. Not a person, not a human being, not a relationship can fill it. You got to get right with Jesus Christ. You got to find Jesus Christ. Because the only time this woman ever had a conversation that was meaningful, a conversation that brought healing, is when she had a conversation with Jesus Christ.
All right. Yeah.
You're pursuing something you'll never catch. You're pursuing something that will never fulfill you if you don't fill it first with Jesus. This woman was despised by the women and used by the men. I don't even really have time to explain to you, but I really want to go to verse 9, because verse 9 in chapter 4 speaks to another critical problem in a group of people who had contributed to this situation. And that was, this woman said something to Jesus that was true. And the feud that was between the Jews and the Samaritans happened 700 years ago. 700 years ago, the Assyrians captured Jerusalem. And what they did was they deported some of the Jews to Assyria, and then they imported some of the Assyrians to Jerusalem. And when they captured Jerusalem, they conquered it. And it was customary, what the Assyrians would do, they would literally deport some of the Jews to become slaves in Assyria. But then they would send some of their citizens to Jerusalem. And so when the Assyrians sent some of the Assyrian people, some of the Assyrian men and women to Jerusalem, they mingled with the Jews and they got married and they had children, thus creating the Samaritan race. Now listen, if you are a Jew, you hate anybody that's not fully Jewish. You despise anybody that is a half-breed. And so the Samaritan people were part Assyrian, part Jewish, and this literally was a 700-year feud. They never could get together. They never did like each other. And my brothers and sisters, this contributed to this woman being in this situation. Because listen, the Samaritans had nothing to do with the Jews. The Jews had nothing to do with the Samaritans. As a matter of fact, the woman asked Jesus, "What are you, a Jew, doing talking to me, a Samaritan?" This long-standing feud, according to verse 9. How is you being a Jew would ask me for a drink? And I really love the translation. In one commentary says that the indication applies, Sister Calvary, that she was saying, you mean to tell me you're going to drink out of the same utensil that I did? I'm drinking out of the utensil, the cup that I'm going to use to get the water. I drink out of it. My lips have touched it. And you mean to tell me you're willing to drink out of the same utensil? And let me tell you, Jesus was trying to tear down the barrier of racism, the barrier of difference, the barrier of a long-standing feud. Jesus was trying to bring hope, peace, and unity. To say, look, I don't care what happened in the past. This is not about what happened in the past. I'm dealing with you right now. I'm willing to tear down this barrier between the Jew and the Samaritan to show you that God has a purpose for your life.
That's right.
And so Jesus wanted to tear this down. And then I want to talk about the other people in this text, which is the religious group, the religious authority. Now I'm going to tell you, my brothers and sisters, they didn't really influence this situation that they should have in the way they should have influenced it. I tell people all the time, I get asked to lecture sometimes, and I explain to them, Michael, the church ain't sinner friendly enough. You know, the only people we want at church is the righteous people. But Jesus says the church is not for the righteous, it's for the sick, who understand they're sick and they need salvation. The church is not for perfect people. It's for imperfect people who realize that they are imperfect, that they struggle. Listen, we are all sick this morning. We all came in here with a condition of sickness, and that is sin problem. We are sinners saved by grace. But ain't nobody in here healthy. Nobody in here well. Nobody in here got it together. Ain't nobody in here perfect. We all came in here sick. This is a hospital, and it is for the sick. Ain't no well folk up in here. I don't care how much spring was in your step. You ain't well spiritually. We're all sick. We all need Jesus Christ. But I'm telling you, the religious system set up in that day, it shunned the sinner. And it talked about how right you had to be, because they were looking at righteousness based on keeping the law. And they thought they kept the law. They thought they were perfect in keeping the law. And anybody that violated the letter of the law, they considered them unrighteous. But let me tell you something. I don't care how much you keep the law, how much you do what's right, you still need Jesus Christ. Because Isaiah says the best that we give is like a filthy rag. We still need grace. None of us are perfect. I'm not righteous because of me. I'm righteous because of him. I'm telling you, my brothers and sisters, it is very interesting that the religious community had literally put this woman on the outside because of their self-righteousness. Didn't realize this woman was a prime candidate to come to faith in Jesus Christ. Now I got to go back to verse 7. Because verse 8 says this, for the disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Now let me tell you, boy, if I had time, I could amplify this point to you. You don't understand the power of this statement in verse 7 of chapter 4 until you go to the end of the story to see how they responded when they came back and saw Jesus talking to this Samaritan woman. Because there's some people God got to get from you in order to bless you. Because those persons can become a distraction. Because Jesus wanted to focus on this woman particularly and individually. And if the disciples did not go into town to buy food, they would have been a distraction. We know they would have been because of what they said when they came back and they saw Jesus talking to this woman. And so they were sent away to buy food. And just one commentator wanted me to explain to you, they ran out of food just at the right time. Because if they'd have had food, they would have stayed. But because they didn't have any food, they had to go get food. And so Jesus let them deplete what they had to go get what they needed at the right time. And listen, one commentator wanted me to tell you all 12 went. And it really didn't need all 12 to go in a practical, in a reality, and in a real sense. But it was needful for all of them to go and buy food because they were going to be a distraction. Because they were already a feuding group of men. They were already a disgruntled group of men. And now they were still holding on to their prejudices and their biases. They were still in the idea that a Jew shouldn't have anything to do with Samaria. You know that from Jerusalem to Capernaum, where Jesus was going to go to and from, was a straight up. But a Jew would go either east or west, cross the Jordan, or go straight up the other side, and just to get there, just to bypass the city of Samaria. But Jesus didn't do that. Jesus went directly through Samaria to the city of Sychar, to the well, because the woman was there. I'm telling you, my brothers and sisters, the disciples had gone away unto the city to buy food. And that's critically important because you don't even understand how serious that is. Now, don't try to bring people back where God sends them away, and not for permanently, but only for a season. I'm telling you, I'm trying to tell people, God has something new for you, and you got to be open to that. And the way God makes things happen, you might not understand them. It might not make sense to you, but God is at work in your life all the time, both bringing things in and putting things out. He is edifying. He is building you up. He is lifting you up. He's bringing you through, and he's doing it in so many different kinds of ways. And then let me skip to verse 16, because verse 16 is a critical moment in the text, because the woman is going to have to really talk about her personal struggles, her personal life. And I really wanted to read the commentators because I really wanted to see the focus of Jesus in this particular narrative and why Jesus brought this up. Because let me tell you what Jesus did when they brought the woman who was caught in the act of adultery. Jesus flipped the script and he started writing on the ground about the people who had brought the woman who they wanted to stone. Jesus flipped the script. But in this particular case, many commentators wonder why Jesus did not call out the men, but called out the woman. Because it was her that he confronted, not the men. Because the men were the reason why the women despised her. Society had rejected her, and the reason why she was at the well by herself in the hottest hour of the day was because of these men. Men were responsible for her feeling the way she felt, being where she was, under the circumstances she was in. It was the men. And Jesus is going to say in verse number 16, go and call your husband and come here. And this was a very explicit and very straight to the point, because Jesus knew. I wanted to entitle this sermon, Judge, Jesus can heal you everywhere you hurt. And you really wanted to really express that Jesus not only dealt with her spiritual condition, but Jesus tapped into some other places where she had some pain emotionally, physically, and also spiritually. This woman was hurting. This woman was in pain. And you really don't understand where people are when you meet them. You think that they are just in a spiritual condition of decline, but sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's mental. People are just in a bad place. And Jesus healed her everywhere she hurt. That wasn't a thing in this text where Jesus did not touch her. He dealt with her spiritual condition, her mental condition, her emotional condition, her social condition. Jesus touched everywhere she hurt.
All right.
You don't know what people are going through. The emotional trauma of their past, the emotional trauma of their life. I'm telling you, it's amazing to me when I talk to people and I counsel people, and you don't really realize that when you start talking to them about one thing and you discover there are 50 other things that are troubling them. You remember when Jesus was in the house of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, and Martha was in the kitchen cooking, and Mary and Martha started complaining that Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus, and Jesus said to Martha, it's more than troubles you than what you are bringing to me right now. You're troubled about many things. You don't even understand what people are going through when they're at moment of crisis, moment of decision, moments of confrontation. This woman had a lot of issues. And Jesus addressed all of them. The woman said, I have no husband. She had 5, and now she's with one. And Jesus said to her, you have well said, I have no husband. And the one you're with is not your husband. That you have spoken truly. And I'm telling you, this woman was so beaten down and broken that she couldn't even justify or try to clarify her situation. Can you get to a place in your life where you're so broken? Oh, I tell you, she was so broken by this point because of her situation, her trauma, all that she had been through. I really need to pause and tell you, you never know what a person has been through when you meet them. You don't know what they've gone through. You don't know the trauma. You don't know the hurt. You don't know the pain. You don't know that they are broken into many pieces. They are scarred in many places. They've been wounded in so many places so deeply. You don't understand where they've been, what they've been through. This woman probably expressed with such comfort and relief, I don't have one. She just had a tough situation. If I could really beat up on these husbands and these men that used her, who are the other people in the text, the reason why this woman was at the well at this time of the day, 12 noon, why she was there all by herself, was because of these men. Men are supposed to protect womanhood, protect the heart of a woman, the integrity of a woman, to keep her safe and make her be trusting of men. But these men had broken and violated the trust. And the woman said to him in verse 19, and I'm going to close with this and explain to you, the woman, in a sense, tried to change the subject. She started talking about, you are a prophet. And she started talking about the place of worship on this mountain. And so you Jews have church in Jerusalem, but we right here on this mountain. And then Jesus got to the heart of the matter. I'm not trying to change anything but you. Because if you get to verse 21, that was Jesus' focus, not to change her perception about the place of worship, because Jesus wanted to change her. And Jesus started offering her something that a man had never offered to her, and that was meaning and purpose through a relationship with him. To drink from the living water. I mean, not physical water, but living water. Because she said to Jesus, I have nothing to draw with. And Jesus said, you're absolutely right. If you had something to draw with, if you were getting water from this physical well, but the well you finna get this water from is from heaven. It's on high. And it's not going to be dipped, but it's going to be poured in you. And Jesus poured into her living water. And then let me go on down to verse 27, and I'm closing, because this is a beautiful story. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful story. Because in verse 27, at this point, the disciples came and marveled that he was talking with a woman. And the text doesn't say this woman, but usually a Jewish man would never talk to a woman in public. Not even if it was his wife or his daughters, his aunties, or grandmother. He just wouldn't talk to a woman in public. They reserved that. A woman had no rights. And here's Jesus talking to a woman in public. And the disciples react. And they said, why are you talking to her? Isn't that something? You see why now Jesus had to send them away? They couldn't be there because they would have interfered in the conversation, the dialogue between these two persons, Jesus and the woman. How critical it was for Jesus to clear the crowd, to get away the animosity this men had toward this woman. And so Jesus sent them to get food. And they said, why are you talking to her? But then the text says the woman left her water pot, went in to the city. And I want you to make sure you don't bypass what's in the text next. She didn't go to the women, but she went to the men. She went to the men. Look at what the text says. When she went back to the city, she went directly to the men who had been using her, the absolute demographic that she had experienced the most pain. She went straight to those who were part of why she was there in the first place. And the Bible says the woman left her water pot, went into the city, and said to the men, come see a real man. Some commentators really want to put emphasis on that part. She said, come see a real man. Didn't use me, but a real man. Didn't try to take advantage of me, but a real man. That saw me more than just as a piece of meat. More than just a woman they could use. But she said, come see a man. So many emphatic emphasis is placed on that particular phrase in the text because it indicates that the woman didn't have any estrangement with men, but for the first time she met a real man who was more interested in her soul, her emotions, her mental state of mind, her person, her reputation, and her being brought into the family of God. Come see a man. Come see a man. She went right back to the place where she had been rejected, in the city of Samaria, in the town square, among the women who had despised her, the men who had used her. She came back to that place and said, for the first time, I met a real man. And one commentator, Michael, really wanted me to put this emphasis in the text, says that when she said that, especially the part when she said, he told me all. Look at what the text says. The text says, who told me all things that I had did. Why do you think they got afraid? Because of what they did with her. Can you imagine going back and telling the man, come see a man who told me all that I had ever done. And it probably struck fear in them because Jesus knew what they had done. Not only what she had done, what they had done to her. Come see a man that told me things that I had ever did. Why most of men got afraid and scared or didn't know what was going to come out of her mouth next. One commentator put an emphasis on that. These were men that she had been used by, men that she had been married to, men that she had been living with, and now she goes and said, come see a man who had told me all things about me. Then the question was asked, could this be the Christ? And they went out of the city and came to him. And in the meanwhile, the disciples urged him, saying, Rabbi, eat. They were about the wrong thing. Jesus had just got a woman saved and had brought revival and evangelism to a city. They weren't about eating. Should have been rejoicing. Should have been happy that one sinner had come to faith in Jesus Christ. You know the only time heaven rejoices is when one sinner comes to faith and get baptized. They worried about eating. They didn't even see the impact and the magnitude of Jesus reaching this one woman saying, come see a man. She brought revival to a whole city. And they talking about Jesus, Rabbi, eat. But Jesus got straight to the point. I got some food. But the food I got ain't the food you brought back. This food I got, no man. Boy, I sure feel like, boy, if you ever eat from this food. I mean, Miss Jefferson cooked some good food, but not like this food. There's some good restaurants in this city, but it ain't good as this food. And he said, I have some food that you do not know about. I sure feel like hollering. Boy, when you eat this food, And this food is in this word. And see, do you ever get up in the morning and snack on this? Do you ever stop in the midday hour and eat a little of this? Before you ever go to bed, do you ever eat this food? This here food will give you strength. This food will give you direction. And this food will give you some hope. They talking about Jesus eating. But Jesus was happy and he hadn't ate because one person had gotten saved and become a great evangelist. And Jesus said, I got some food that you don't know nothing about. And then the disciples said to one another, has anyone brought him anything to eat? Still didn't get it. They thought somebody else had brought him something to eat. And boy, I don't have time to unpack that. But Jesus had to explain to them, the food I got, it comes from above, not from beneath. It's not grown in the ground, but it comes from heaven. That man shall not live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. But I thank God that this woman was reached by Jesus. And Jesus had an irresistible impact on this woman's life. A woman who was marginalized by the religious community, despised by the women, used by the man, stood at the well all alone. But thank God for Jesus. And I need to tell you, when others forget you, the Lord ain't forgot you. When the world rejects you and don't think much of you, Jesus knows who you are. I'm trying to tell you, don't worry when they don't like you if you got the Lord on your side. Because he will never leave you nor forsake you. The Lord will remember you when nobody else will. And when nobody else will come where you are, just hold on. Jesus is on his way. Do I have any witnesses in here? And I got a witness that can testify that you thank God that the Lord came and seen about you. That when you were down in despair, the Lord came to see about you. I want to close with one of my favorite songs, and that is, I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peaceful shore, very deeply stained within, sinking to rise no more. But the master of the sea heard my despairing cry. And from the waters he lifted me, now safe am I. And I've got some witnesses in here that can testify that you sinking one day and you thank God that the Lord came and rescued you. Do I have any witnesses in here that can testify, that can be a witness that the Lord came and rescued you? And I'm so glad that the Lord came and rescued me. And it was one Friday night in a little church on Shady Lane, a church called Shady Grove Baptist Church. W.C. Keys was preaching the gospel and talking about Jesus. And I was sitting on the mourner's bench, and Sister Bertha Garner came and kneeled down beside me. And she said to the Lord while I was sitting there, Lord, let his soul be saved. She kept on praying, and the preacher kept on preaching. And I'm glad that that night on a Friday, the Lord came and see about that. Do I have any witnesses in here that can testify that you're glad the Lord came to see about you? Because if the Lord got to reach way down, Jesus will pick you
you up. It doesn't make any difference where you are in life. Just wait on the Lord. He might not come when you want him, but I can guarantee you he'll come on time. Do I have any witnesses in here? Won't the Lord come see about you? Won't he come into your messy situation? And won't he come in and change things? Do I have any witnesses in here? I'm so glad that the Lord came to see about me. When the world cast me aside, I'm glad that Jesus came and rescued me. And I'm just like Leandra Johnson. This is my exodus. Some of y'all don't understand. You close to your exodus. And exodus is you coming out. You coming out of your situation. You coming out of your mess. You coming out of situations that seem to have you trapped. This is your exodus. I don't care what you do. You can't stop God. I don't care what others do. They can't stop God. I sure feel like preaching here this morning because I'm a living witness that he can and he will. The door of the church is open. I'm glad that the Lord came to see me where I was. And he changed me and gave me a new heart, gave me a new walk. The old church used to say, when I looked at my hands, they looked new. I looked at my feet and they did too. Because the Lord came to see me right where I was. And what a change has been wrought in my life since Jesus came into my heart. The door of the church is open. I'm glad that I know Jesus. The other people in the text might have got in the woman's way, but they couldn't get in Jesus' way. They might have prevented the woman from seeing the light, but when she came to Jesus, Jesus was the light. They might have made the woman's way hard, but Jesus says, I am the way. They might have not shared the truth with the woman, but Jesus said,